Indonesia itu menjadi negara anggota FATF melewati ambang batas yang sangat minimum.
Indonesia is being perceived internationally as a corrupt country to the extent that it's being ranked at par or at the same level with countries that are lowly governed, countries that are at war, countries that have no proper democratic institutions that will now have negative impact even on economic development.
Ya, selamat datang kembali di channel Satu Visi Utama. Malam ini kita kedatangan narasumber yang luar biasa terkait dengan keilmuannya. Namanya itu kita panggil Mas Prosper Magucu. Dan nanti kita akan panggil beliau dengan namanya Prosper. Jadi beliau ini kelahiran dari Zimbabwe yang saat ini profesinya sebagai associate professor di Vrije University di Amsterdam. Dan selain itu dia juga sebagai founder dari Excellence Center terkait dengan money laundering. Namanya itu AMLI. AMLI itu kepanjangan dari Anti Money Laundering Institute, yang aktivitinya itu dia melakukan research dan memberikan asistensi ke beberapa negara terkait dengan pembentukan policy, kebijakan ya, dan juga secara teknis bagaimana lembaga terkait di suatu negara mengenhance atau mengimprove, mengembangkan terkait dengan teknik-teknik atas pencegahan dan pemberantasan terkait dengan isu pencucian uang di negara-negara. So, hello Prosper, how are you?
Hi, Paku. Hi. Good to have you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Good afternoon. Good afternoon from your side.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Prosper, we would like to do a discussion about the current situations in regard to corruptions and money laundering issues happening in Indonesia right now. So, I believe that recently you visited Indonesia, gave some lectures to university, for example, in North Sumatra University and Hasanuddin University in Makassar. And I also heard that you gave like a technical training for the Attorney General Office in Indonesia, Indonesian Police, including PPATK, yeah, if I'm not mistaken. So my first question is to open our discussions, believing that I believe that you have already done some research about the situations in Indonesia regarding the corruption issues. Is there any correlation between your recent visit, which I mentioned before, giving lectures and training, knowing that right now you are an associate professor focusing on anti-money laundering and anti-corruption for Vrije University in Amsterdam. Am I correct? In Amsterdam, right? And you
Yes,
also
that's
now
correct.
the founder of the Anti-Money Laundering Institute. I think also founded by you, yeah. And now you are also the director for this organization. So, could you give us briefly about, I mean, from your last visit to Indonesia, the correlation between your activities, maybe your advocacy to the our current situation in Indonesia. Maybe you are like helping us in reshaping the policy or giving a technical assistance or maybe other things. I think we can start from there. So please, Prosper. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Paco. Yeah, so let me kick off by giving also a very bit background to our viewers and listeners that I have been coming to Indonesia since the past for the past 4 years to give guest lectures in areas of anti-money laundering, anti-corruption, international asset recovery. And my recent visit, you just mentioned, was also in line with my usual activities. So giving lectures on anti-money laundering, but also in addition, this time I also gave training, technical capacity to various government departments that are working on AML. And the correlation now, especially for this last visit, was informed by the recent mutual evaluation report by the Financial Action Task Force of Indonesia in 2023. So last year, Indonesia was assessed and the mutual evaluation was publicized by the Financial Action Task Force. It's also maybe important to mention the fact that Indonesia is the 40th permanent member of the Financial Action Task Force. So that also deserves a little bit of recognition. But also that comes with a very heavy responsibility that Indonesia should now take the recommendations very seriously and the mutual evaluation also quite seriously. So it is in that regard that I framed my lectures as well as my trainings. The training that I did in my last visit was based on the findings by the mutual evaluation assessors, those who assessed Indonesia. In two main areas, I focused on two main areas. One was the prosecution of third-party money launderers, and the second was also the prosecution of legal persons, such as financial institutions, other non-natural persons who may be involved in perpetrating money laundering in Indonesia, because these two areas were highlighted in the Financial Action Task Force Mutual Report as two of the most important areas where Indonesia is still lacking. So this was the relationship between my visit and the current status of corruption and money laundering in Indonesia. Then maybe the other final point is the focus was mainly on corruption as a predicate offense, because also according to the report, the major predicate offense that is contributing to money laundering in Indonesia is corruption, and this is by far. So all the other offenses, they also contribute proceeds of crimes, but corruption is the main contributor of proceeds of corruption in Indonesia by a very huge margin. So this is how I connected my visit, my training, my teachings to the current pressing or topical issues in regards to money laundering in Indonesia.
Thanks, Prosper. I think I want to capture your last statement, about corruption as, I think, as the major, as the major predicate crime for the money laundering happening in Indonesia. From that, what's your perspective, knowing that what you said before, corruption as the major predicate crime of money laundering in Indonesia, to see the correlations or how far the corruption affects the low stability in Indonesia? So my first questions, how far or how deep the corruption in Indonesia, affect the low stability? And the second question is, accordingly, because you said before is the major predicate crimes, so how the money laundering itself affecting not only the low stability in Indonesia, but affecting its newest position as, I think, the latest permanent FATF member, because you say being a FATF member, it gives like not only a big task but also a big burden as a country. So those the questions, the corruption and the money laundering. how it affects not only the low stability but affecting our most recent position as the newest member of the FATF. So what do you think?
Yeah. So first question first, the correlationship between corruption and the low standards or stability of Indonesia. Again, Paco, here, allow me to refer to another latest report. This is the Transparency International Corruption Perceptions Index, released 2 months ago, end of January, where again Indonesia was ranked is a country that is still perceived to be highly corrupt. It is ranked, if I'm to refer to countries that I'm very familiar with, African countries, Indonesia is ranked at par, at the same level with countries such as Malawi. Yeah,
Oh,
yet Indonesia is one of the G20 countries. It's a quite rich country, a country that is a permanent member of the Financial Action Task Force. I'll come back to that. So it doesn't really give a good image for Indonesia to be ranked with such very low countries, low governed economies. So this is the same ranking that Indonesia is currently facing. And again, according to that same report, the one released by Transparency International early this year, there is a negative impact that corruption is having on the justice sector. So corruption is having it is a debilitating factor on the rule of law. Yeah. So we look at the rule of law, we look at the justice sector. Courts are not able to give unbiased or impartial judgments because of corruption. Corruption also, including in Indonesia, but also elsewhere, is making it difficult for the highly corrupt to face accountability. So there is some dissatisfaction even among youths in Indonesia. As I was also giving my lectures, they were asking questions that shows they are also dissatisfied with the commitment by the government to fight corruption. They actually think that the corruption more can be done in terms of fighting corruption. So it's having a very negative impact on the rule of law. So the respect of the laws of Indonesia. It seems that because of corruption, there is now a class of people who may be above the law, and then there is the law that is for everybody else, who is those who are not connected, those who are not well, who don't have resources as compared to others. So that's the impact that corruption is having on the rule of law in Indonesia. But this will also have effect on other issues such as development as well. Of course, Indonesia is doing quite well in terms of development, but if this continues, the rate in which corruption perceptions, Indonesia is being perceived internationally as a corrupt country to the extent that it's being ranked at par or at the same level with countries that are lowly governed, countries that are at war, countries that have no proper democratic institutions, that will now have negative impact even on economic development. So there is need for Indonesia to already to introduce mechanisms to fight corruption. There were certain classes of corruption that were actually highlighted. There were issues such as political money. That's the way it's called, normally called in Indonesia. But I think this is a way to describe corruption relating to gift giving to politicians. But these are not just small gifts. So we are talking about, giving enormous resources to have certain people in power, so that many from Sumatra, from even in Hassan Dini in Makassar, many people who participated, who attended the sessions, were really raising this issue: how to deal with political money. They believe that politicians should owe their, being in parliament to the electorate, not to a few individuals who support them or who finance them to be to get seats in parliament. There was also issues such as embezzlement of public funds. There's been some other different forms of corruption, others also relating to fraud, and corruption also involving private sector. That was also highlighted, that the private sector is also involved in corruption, but the law is not quite clear when it comes to punishing private sector when they are involved in corruption. And that also is confirmed by that report I've also mentioned, the one from the Financial Action Task Force, that private entities, legal entities, have not been prosecuted. They've only been successful, Indonesian prosecutors have only successfully convicted one legal entity. And that's really is a paradox, given the number of companies that are operating in Indonesia, and also given the number of complaints against legal entities involved in corruption or money laundering. So the same effect, negative effect that corruption does have on the rule of law is also attributed to money laundering. Money laundering is siphoning money away that could be channeled towards development. That money is siphoned away to and is hidden elsewhere. So, but on the other hand, Indonesia has been also doing quite making some progress in terms of asset recovery. That has also been acknowledged by the Financial Action Task Force. But remember, there are also other 40 recommendations. So Indonesia may be quite good in one or two of these recommendations. For instance, when it comes to prosecution, it's doing quite well in prosecuting self-launderers, but they are not doing much in prosecuting third-party launderers, those who are assisting money launderers to get their ill-gotten gains cleaned or washed. So they are not doing much in prosecuting professional money launderers. There may be people who are in another legal business, such as accountants, lawyers, financial institutions, but also illicit businesses set up for the purposes of assisting criminals to launder their ill-gotten gains. There are quite a number of cases that you hear sometimes only in international media that, criminal enterprises, they are setting shop in areas such as Bali for the purposes of washing drug money. So Indonesia has not been making much progress in that regards. And this can have a negative impact also on the stability of the country, including its relation with other states. If you now house people who are involved in perpetrating crimes, who may also be involved in destabilizing other economies, that can also have a negative impact on the reputation of Indonesia as a state. So it needs to do more in terms of fighting third-party money launderers, also fighting prosecuting money laundering by other than those who are laundering their own proceeds of crimes. The effects are quite negative on the rule of law, on the justice delivery, but also even on the basic delivery of basic necessities. If money is now channeled elsewhere, then there won't be much left to go towards service delivery. So that was some of the issues that were raised, especially by the young. They were a bit dissatisfied with the way politicians are accepting money that is questionable from entities, because they believe that they become beholden to those who are sponsoring them. So they want laws to be passed to clearly govern that area of political financing. But there are also other forms of corruption that people believe the government should do more to prosecute.
Okay, thanks, Prosper. I think let me re-explain what you just said to our friends, our audience in bahasa. Jadi teman-teman menarik ya dari penjelasannya Bang Prosper ini. Jadi kita panggilnya Bang Prosper. Jadi dia ini kalau nggak salah bulan lalu dia diundang ke Indonesia untuk kasih semacam kuliah umum di beberapa universitas Hasanuddin, Universitas Sumatera Utara, USU ya, juga ngasih beberapa pelatihan kepada kejaksaan, beberapa lembaga ya terkait penegakan hukum seperti Kejaksaan Agung, Kepolisian, dan juga diundang untuk diskusi untuk beberapa hal yang teknis bersama misalnya teman-teman di PPATK. Nah, Pertanyaan tadi kan bagaimana si Bang Prosper ini dari aktivitas yang terakhir di Indonesia melihat adanya hubungan atau kaitannya antara korupsi, pencucian uang dengan stabilitas hukum di Indonesia, dan paling penting tadi dia mengapresiasi kalau Indonesia itu baru-baru ini diangkat tahun lalu menjadi anggota FATF. Kita harus berbangga. Tetapi di satu sisi ternyata menjadi anggota FATF memberikan tidak hanya dampak yang positif, tetapi juga memberikan kita burden. Kalau kata dia, burden itu apa? Beban. Beban untuk apa? Menjaga tidak hanya reputasi. Ternyata ada implikasi-implikasi yang mungkin tidak hanya dalam sektor hukum, tapi juga politik, bahkan finansial atau ekonomi. Terkait dengan misalnya isu korupsi atau money laundering yang mungkin terjadi di suatu negara. Tadi dia jelaskan, yang menarik dia mengquote ya, ada namanya itu laporan, report, yang diproduksi, dihasilkan dari Transparansi Internasional, khususnya di tahun 2023, si Bang Prosper ini bilang, kamu tahu nggak Indonesia itu salah satu negara anggota G20. Tadi dia jelaskan secara sederhana, G20 ini negara-negara yang kita bisa lihat ini bukan negara sembarangan nih, negara yang secara ekonomi bisa dilihat sebagai cukup stabil, bagus, bahkan kita lihat turunannya berarti negara ini tidak hanya secara ekonomi tapi secara kepastian hukum juga memiliki tingkat yang sangat baik. Di satu sisi tadi dia tekankan menjadi kontradiktif melihat balik lagi tadi dari laporannya si Transparansi Internasional ada persepsi indeks terkait dengan korupsi yang menempatkan Indonesia sejajar dengan beberapa negara Afrika. Kalau saya tidak salah, dia menyebut salah satunya itu namanya negara Malawi. Di mana ini negara-negara yang mungkin bukan menjadi negara G20. Kalau kita lihat level korupsinya, level stabilitas hukumnya, bahkan level stabilitas ekonomi atau keuangannya. Nah, ini menjadi kontradiktif dan tentunya dia sebagai analis ataupun researcher menjadi hal yang menarik untuk dilakukan penelitian lebih dalam. Nah, dia juga dalam kegiatan terakhirnya di Indonesia, dia diundang ke beberapa tempat tadi, salah satunya Kejaksaan Agung, tadi dia kutip. Bahkan dari perspektif teman-teman di aparat penegak hukum di Indonesia, yang tadi saya tangkap ya, mungkin sepertinya dia mendapatkan analisis ini berdasarkan studi empiris dia di sana, Indonesia di-acknowledge sebagai salah satu negara yang cukup berhasil untuk memprosecute atau menangani perkara pencucian uang yang di dalamnya tadi dia mengutip ada namanya self launder. Akan tetapi Indonesia masih kurang maksimal untuk melakukan penanganan perkara yang di dalamnya ada keterlibatan third party launderer. Third party launderer apa? Tadi dijelaskan. Jadi ini adalah orang-orang yang membantu si pelaku kejahatan, bisa kita katakanlah pelaku kejahatan asal, contohnya ada kejahatan perbankan, kejahatan narkoba. Nah, uang yang dihasilkan dari kejahatan ini lalu dibantu sama pihak ketiga. Pihak ketiga apa yang mempunyai expertise tertentu. Contohnya tadi disebutkan membangun skema yang kompleks. Tadi dia sebutkan konteksnya itu ada illicit business structure. Jadi membangun struktur perusahaan yang di dalamnya hanya untuk dia bilang apa namanya mencuci uang-uang yang terindikasi itu hasil atau terkait dari suatu tindak pidana atau kejahatan. Itu yang pertama. Yang kedua, dia juga tadi ada satu pesan yang menurut saya ini sangat bagus ya untuk kita lakukan kajian lebih dalam bahwa kalau kita bicara pencucian uang, tidak hanya ini tanda kutip merusak suatu negara karena pencucian uang itu kan pasti didahului oleh suatu kejahatan asal atau tadi disebut predicate crime. Tetapi yang paling berbahaya adalah uang yang dihasilkan dari suatu kejahatan yang sudah terjadi misalnya di negara kita, uang itu bisa jadi tidak lagi berada di sini. Tadi dia katakan shifting. Shifting itu apa? Bisa jadi uang itu dipindahkan hilang. Tadi saya kutip, bisa jadi uang itu sudah tidak ada lagi atau mungkin tidak banyak lagi yang berputar atau beredar di dalam negeri. Karena berkali-kali ditegaskan tujuan atau esensi dari money laundering adalah lahirnya unsur di mana uang hasil kejahatan itu menjadi tidak terlacak oleh lembaga atau aparat yang memiliki kewenangan untuk melakukan penegakan hukum terkait dengan pencucian uang ini. Dengan lahirnya unsur yang menjadi tidak terlacak, tersembunyi, diumpetin gampangnya, bisa jadi si orang-orang ini, pelaku kejahatan ini berpikir kalau begitu, uang ini lebih baik tidak saya simpan di dalam negeri, tetapi saya alirkan ke luar negeri. Nah, balik ke konteks tadi antara Bang Prosper memberikan analisis antara menarik ya, Indonesia sebagai negara G20, berarti kalau kita lihat secara stabilitas keuangan, oh ini prestis sekali nih, negara bagus ini, negara tanda kutip ekonominya sangat maju ini. Tapi di satu sisi tadi dia langsung melakukan analisis yang sangat kontradiktif bahwa kita ternyata levelnya sama dengan negara-negara korup seperti di Afrika. Nah, balik ke konteks pencucian uang tadi, teman-teman bisa bayangkan, apalagi ada statement sebelumnya, Bang Prosper bilang korupsi adalah kejahatan penyumbang terbesar dalam konteks pencucian uang di Indonesia. Nah, berarti kalau itu semua kita kaitkan, kita jahit, implikasinya apa terhadap stabilitas ekonomi kita? Sangat luar biasa. Teman-teman bisa bayangkan. Tadi dia meng-highlight dengan adanya isu korupsi ini berarti stabilitas hukum menjadi rentan. Kalau stabilitas hukum menjadi rentan, kita tarik lagi secara jauh. Bagaimana investasi menjadi dipastikan kenyamanan dan keamanannya. Makanya tadi dia bilang, dari satu korupsi, uang hasil korupsi itu bisa jadi uang yang dimanunin tidak ada di sini. Nah, dari sini saya mau mengaitkan dengan isu stabilitas ekonomi. So, Prosper, I just re-explain what you talked before. I added some points.
Yes.
I also want to ask further about, before you say that it's quite prestigious for us Indonesia becoming a member of G20 countries. Let's say people will think that, oh, G20 countries, including countries, for example, who have a very good economic or financial stability. So my questions, before you said it's quite irony and contradictive comparing us, Indonesia, as a member of G20 countries, but knowing the fact from the CPI perspective index, yeah, you said that we have a similar level like a Malawi, which I think the country that you mentioned, Malawi, maybe doesn't have the same, let's say, adequate power of economic power compared to other G20 members. So based on that issue, how you make analysis capturing all the nexus between money laundering, corruption, knowing us as the G20 member countries have a very contradictive fact that we have a similar level like maybe a corrupt African countries. In the further, in the future, how you predict our economic situations, knowing that before you said the stability of rule of law in countries where the corruption's level is very high or having a quite a big risk. So the first questions, what is your analysis? How you predict the economic stability? Maybe we could capture some issues like, for example, like investment ratio or macroeconomic perspective in the future for Indonesia based on your expertise by tailoring those issues. So
Okay.
we can
Yes.
start from there. Yeah.
Okay, sure. Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, corruption in the long run will make it very challenging for Indonesia to do business. So, corruption will be an additional tax. You already have your taxes. I don't know, let's say tax is pegged at 10% is sales tax. But if somebody is corrupt or many people are corrupt, that is an additional tax again on goods and services that are coming from Indonesia. So in the long run, this will have a negative impact on the economy of Indonesia, which so far has been doing quite well. In the short run, let's say immediately, corruption may seem to be good in accessing, giving people access to start companies and so forth and so on. But in the long run, it would definitely have a negative impact on the economy of Indonesia. And the reason why I'm emphasizing the position of Indonesia as a member of the G20, also as one that is a permanent member of the Financial Action Task Force, is that if you look at other G20 members, they are doing quite well in terms of fighting corruption. So if you look at the top countries on the Anti-Corruption Perceptions Index, top countries in fighting money laundering, they are countries that are also in the G20. So the mechanisms are there to fight corruption for G20 countries. What is happening, or what may appear to be happening, is that Indonesia is not really being fully committed to its anti-corruption commitments as prescribed to it by the G20. There was, for instance, the Bali summit. I think it was in 2022, right? Where also it was declared that, Indonesia and other G20 member states would denounce corruption in all its different forms, including kleptocracy and things like that. But Indonesia has not been very committed in implementing those mechanisms. So this, in the end, will have a negative impact on its economy, but may also, especially when it comes to the Financial Action Task Force, it may also lead again to a negative assessment of the country. You have made it into the top 40, permanent 40 members, but barely at the very minimum. So Indonesia made it into the Financial Action Task Force permanent membership by passing the very minimum standards. So there is a risk that if you don't improve, you can still be relegated or at least be grey-listed. So you still need to do more, quite more, in order to gain your membership, also in order to gain the credibility at the international level. I think in a nutshell, this may answer your questions, Paco. I don't know, yeah?
Oke, thanks Kok. Thanks Prosper. Jadi teman-teman, ini menarik ya, tadi dikatakan juga sama Bang Prosper, dalam jangka pendek korupsi itu bisa sangat mempengaruhi, karena tadi dia melihat perspektifnya dari isu pendapatan negara, ada isu perpajakan juga. Bahkan itu kalau saya tambahkan sedikit, saya elaborasi sedikit, mungkin sangat relate dengan isu misalnya dana pendidikan, dana kesehatan, dana sosial yang lain, di mana ini pasti akan mempengaruhi terkait dengan bagaimana kekuatan suatu negara dalam mensejahterakan masyarakatnya dengan taraf atau standar yang sangat baik. Karena tadi Bang Prosper katakan, korupsi ini bisa mempengaruhi tadi unsur uang negara, pemasukan, bahkan isu perpajakan. Yang kalau kita elaborate, dana-dana ini yang pastinya ujungnya itu disalurkan untuk siapa? Untuk kesejahteraan masyarakat. Dan tadi dia bilang untuk long run-nya juga mempunyai impact atau implikasi yang negatif untuk perekonomian Indonesia. Saya mengquote statement-nya Bang Prosper sebelumnya, tadi dia cerita, dia keliling-keliling nih, dia ngajar di Universitas Hasanuddin, Universitas Sumatera Utara, bahkan sebelumnya dia juga pengajar di Universitas Indonesia, khususnya di Fakultas Hukum. Dia cerita, mahasiswanya dia saat dia menjadi visiting scholars ya, atau visiting lecturers, jadi dosen tamu, dosen yang diundang, bilang, ini pemerintah Indonesia komitmen untuk memberantas korupsinya dipertanyakan. Nah, yang menarik tadi dia sampaikan juga bahwa kita jangan berbangga dulu kalau kita sudah menjadi anggota, tadi dikatakan atau disampaikan, dari FATF. Kenapa? Karena ternyata tadi dikritisi oleh Bang Prosper, Indonesia itu menjadi negara anggota FATF melewati ambang batas yang sangat minimum. Nah, kita harus jaga nih dengan apa? Komitmen kita mengimplementasikan, tadi dia katakan nggak cuma anti korupsi, tapi juga anti pencucian uang. Kenapa? Tadi ada terminologi yang dia sampaikan, kalau kita nggak passing minimum standard as the FATF countries member, I think you mentioned there is a terminology of gray listed area ya. So jadi
Yes.
negara kita bisa masuk ke dalam daftar negara yang tanda kutip dikasih warnanya abu-abu nih. Bahkan tadi dia katakan juga bisa jadi kemungkinan terburuk status sebagai negara ini, negara anggota FATF bisa jadi dipikir-pikir lagi nih sama si pembuat keputusan ini. Nah, yang menarik dia juga sampaikan jangan lupa loh, waktu event G20 kemarin yang dilaksanakan di Bali, termasuk puncak acaranya, Indonesia diberikan catatan kritis oleh negara-negara G20 bahwa Indonesia harus memberikan komitmen pemberantasan korupsi yang konkret. Berarti analisisnya tadi disampaikan bisa jadi komitmen Indonesia untuk memberantas korupsi masih belum maksimal. Nah, ini tadi juga sampaikan implementasi komitmen G20 ternyata memiliki korelasi implikasi yang juga penting. Untuk tadi dia sampaikan sebelumnya long run. Jadi jangka panjang bagaimana kita melihat stabilitas ekonomi di Indonesia. Jadi teman-teman walaupun mungkin kita berpikir oh isu korupsi, isu pencucian uang ini isu yang tanda kutip sering lahir di media atau tiap hari kita baca di koran, tetapi kalau didalami kebetulan Bang Prosper ini selain dia associate professor di Belanda, dia juga praktisi memberikan pelatihan kepada aparat penegak hukum di beberapa negara bagaimana tadi memberantas korupsi dan pencucian uang. Dia melihat ini konkret loh implikasinya terhadap tadi kekuatan suatu negara mensejahterakan masyarakatnya. Jadi kalau saya bisa sederhanakan, dalam longer term, dalam waktu yang lebih lama lagi, isu korupsi dan pencucian uang menjadi isu yang serius kalau kita coba kaitkan dengan isu stabilitas ekonomi dari suatu negara. So, I think I tried to wrap up some important message that you mentioned before to our friends, to our audience out there. So before we close or we end our discussions, which is for me it's very interesting, uh, could you maybe give a message not only for our government but also to our I would like to say to our youngster because you repeatedly mentioned in the long term, in the long run, there are some risks which we could be facing from the
Mm.
corruption, from the money laundering issues. So I would like to hear from you, maybe your message or maybe your thought, not only for our government, but in particular for our youngsters about the message that you are going to bring up within this discussion. So please, Prosper.
Thank you. Thank you again, and for giving me this opportunity to give like some final message. I want to reiterate what I had in one of the discussions after a lecture at one of the universities. Many people were pressing me to subscribe or to recommend for a law that can deal with certain areas of corruption. And then I think that is the problem. And I want to challenge our viewers, especially our young viewers who are watching right now, the youth, that let's not base everything, especially the fight against corruption, let's not leave it to the lawmakers, to those who are in power, that they will pass laws that will make corruption go away and so forth and so on. We all have a role to play when it comes to fighting corruption. So we can fight corruption using different methods, different means. It's not just about the law, and the fight against corruption is not only dedicated or limited to those who are in power. You and I, those who are not in power, those who are in academia, those who are still in school, everybody, those in private sector, we all have different roles to play when it comes to fighting corruption. So we need to fight to play our role in curbing corruption. We need not to participate, for example, in paying bribes. We need to blow the whistle when we identify or we see corruption happening. We don't have to turn a blind eye. We need to build capacity, to other members of the society who may not have access to watch this podcast, for example. So we know others are not watching, but if we can also keep spreading the message. So we need to also popularize anti-corruption methods. We need to ask critical questions to those who are in charge of, those who are in power, those who are our leaders, with respect and circumspect. I'm not advocating that people should go to the streets, but we need to participate in those mechanisms that have been created by the Indonesian constitution, where our leaders come to meet with us. We need also to make them feel that they should account to us. So we need to be active, not proactive, not to wait until corruption has happened and then we start raising placards or we start complaining about it via social media. We need to be proactive to prevent it from happening in the first place. Right now, what we see with Indonesia is that it has been stagnant. Not only Indonesia, but the whole region, really, the Asia Pacific region has been stagnant in fighting corruption. In other countries, your neighbors, the conflicts going on, let's say in Myanmar, in other areas, but Indonesia is not at conflict at the moment. So this should be a very good opportunity to build very strong mechanisms to make sure that you reduce corruption radically. It needs to be reduced, and there is an opportunity. I was there. I saw everybody does have a smartphone. Let's use those apps to report incidents of corruption. Let's use the technology to spread the news against corruption, to demonize corruption, and also to keep ourselves, aware of the latest trends or what is happening and so forth. So we have a role to play. Overall, what I'm saying is that let's not leave it to the politicians. Let's not leave it to the policymakers. Let's not leave it to the lawmakers. They may be benefiting from certain acts that we are not happy with. So it's not in their interest to pass laws that are unfavorable to them, but it is in our interest also for the future generation to make sure that we push those who are representing us to represent us in a way that is sustainable, in a way that is ethical, and they still remain accountable to us. I hope the message is quite clear.
Yeah, thank you, Prosper. Your message is very clear and loud
Yeah.
and strong and doable. Doable
And
is very
doable,
easy.
very
It's very
important.
visible. Ya, jadi
Yes.
teman-teman tadi Bang Prosper katakan ya, untuk kita berperan ya, berpartisipasi dalam melakukan tidak hanya pemberantasan korupsi, tapi juga pencegahan korupsi, itu kita tidak hanya saja bisa bergantung kepada pembuat kebijakan, tadi dikatakan parlemen atau pemerintah, tetapi kita bisa memulai dari diri kita. Apakah kita dalam sisi dari akademisi, mungkin kita pelajar, anak SMP, SMA, mahasiswa, atau mungkin kita dari sektor swasta, private, atau mungkin dari sektor atau industri yang lain. Caranya bagaimana? Pertama, katakan tidak terkait korupsi. Dengan cara apa? Tadi dikatakan menarik. Kita bisa kalau di sekeliling kita ada sesuatu yang sifatnya koruptif, seperti untuk ngurus ini itu kita harus kasih uang, kita harus nge-bribe, kita harus nyuap. Stop kebiasaan tersebut. Yang pertama. Kalau sampai situ ternyata kita bisa melakukan lebih, kita siarkan. Tadi dia mention juga menarik, ada masukannya. Gunakanlah kemajuan teknologi. Untuk apa? Tidak hanya melaporkan, tapi menyebarluaskan praktek-praktek koruptif yang ada di negara kita. Kenapa ini bisa menjadi message yang penting? Untuk tadi, membangun stabilitas kita yang lebih baik, yang tentunya menurunkan level korupsi. Tadi sempat meng-compare sedikit ya dengan negara tetangga kita, tadi disebut Myanmar, karena dia bilang di negara-negara Asia Pasifik itu level untuk meningkatkan level anti korupsinya itu cukup stagnan. Apalagi contohnya tadi Myanmar yang di mana di dalamnya ada konflik. Nah, ini menjadi berita yang sangat baik untuk Indonesia. Kenapa? Kita tidak punya konflik di dalamnya. Konflik seperti tadi disampaikan ada perang di dalam itu seperti Myanmar kata si Bang Prosper. Karena Indonesia cenderung lebih stabil dari isu konflik seperti itu, maka seharusnya kemampuan kita untuk melakukan tadi men-surprise, menurunkan level korupsi harusnya lebih baik. Kalau ditanya untuk apa, tadi sudah kita jelaskan dalam diskusi ini bisa nanti impact-nya sangat luas. Kalau ujungnya kita lihat stabilitas ekonomi, tapi di tengah-tengahnya kita bicara tadi sekilas bagaimana negara bisa mensejahterakan masyarakatnya, memenuhi secara maksimal kecukupan untuk edukasi yang sangat baik, kesehatan sangat baik, dan isu-isu sosial yang lain dengan sangat baik. Dengan catatan tadi, negaranya tidak korup. Sehingga dana-dana tersebut tidak berkurang atau bahkan hilang. Bahkan ditambahkan lagi tadi ada isu money laundering, yang bahkan dana-dana itu yang sudah dikorupsi, di money laundering kan bisa jadi dana itu tidak ada lagi beredar atau berputar di negara kita. Jadi teman-teman itu pesan dari Bang Prosper yang menurut saya sangat penting untuk kita bisa menjadi negara yang lebih baik. Sekali lagi, terima kasih once again Prosper. We are so grateful having you here for you to spend your time giving us, I would say, a lecture on a very interesting topic on corruption and the anti-money laundering. So once again, Prosper, thank you very much.
Pleasure is mine.
Yes.
And yeah.
Oke, baik teman-teman, itu diskusi kita dengan Bang Prosper hari ini. Terima kasih, sampai bertemu lagi di diskusi-diskusi selanjutnya di dalam channel Satu Visi Utama.